One of the big viewer questions that I keep seeing and I keep getting is this: what are the most pro-gun and anti-gun courts in the country? That's what we're gonna be taking a look at in this video because you guys keep asking and I will deliver for you. So let's get into it. All right, so quick reminder, there are 94 federal trial courts. That's where lawsuits almost always start. From there, on appeal, we go up to one of the federal circuit courts of appeal. There's going to be 12 federal circuits we're going to be talking about. So there's federal circuits. Usually federal circuits encompasses one or typically multiple states at a time, as you will see. Then finally, above that, we get to the United States Supreme Court. Why is this so important to be talking about the federal circuits? Because in order to get to the U.S. Supreme Court, we have to start in the federal trial court, then we have to appeal to the federal circuit court, and then from there we go to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court accepts less than, on average, 3% of cases that are appealed from the federal circuit courts, meaning those federal circuit courts, those are super important because those are the courts of last opinion about 97% of the time or more. In other words, those are effectively the Supreme Court for different regions across the United States. They are staffed by a various number of judges, some of them by a lot more, others by a lot less, that get lifetime appointments from the president, and they're confirmed and seated by the Senate. That's the process on how they get in there, meaning you get some courts that, depending upon where their vacancies come up, they can tilt very heavily one direction or the other politically, and it will take sometimes decades to reverse that tilt. So it's very, very important to keep this in mind. Now, the last thing to keep in mind on all this is very simple. By and large, in today's age, you can pretty much correlate Republican appointees as being pro-Second Amendment and Democrat appointees as being anti-Second Amendment. I hope someday that will change and everyone will be pro-Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is not about politics, it's about people. But for the time being, I'm going to use that as the barometer because it's frankly very accurate to determine where courts stand on guns. I'm going to save the first place, in other words, the best Second Amendment court by this metric and this measure, as well as the last place until the very end. Hey, really quickly, two things. Number one, if you're enjoying this video, of course, all the YouTube things, please consider giving it a thumbs up. Number two, we've got a sponsor for this video, and that's my law firm. It takes me, I think, as you can guess, a fair amount of time to research for these videos, put them together, come and film them, all that kind of good stuff. Not to mention Derek, our brave videographer and editor, who is, of course, working full-time for the law firm to come in and do all that kind of good stuff as well. So something you can do if you're enjoying our legal education content is please consider giving our Google My Business page for the law firm a 5-star review. It's something that really helps out the practice, which at the end of the day allows me to come here and play internet lawyer for you. So it's absolutely free, takes a few moments. Just check it out in the pinned comment below. It's also in the description box. Follow the link. It asks you to rate us on 0 to 5 stars. Keep in mind, this is the internet. 3-4 stars, kind of a failing grade. So if you felt like you get good, decent legal education content, please consider leaving a 5-star review. I appreciate it very, very much. Now back to the program. So let's start with our second place. In other words, the second best place. And this may come to some of you as a surprise. We are in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, headquartered out of New Orleans. We are talking about Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi. The Fifth Circuit has been extremely pro-firearm. So many of the rulings that we have been getting over the last few years, particularly since the Brune decision, the June 22nd of 2022, United States Supreme Court Brune decision that laid out and completely reshaped the constitutional framework or how we examine gun laws. It has led to more gun laws being determined to be illegal and unconstitutional in just the 6 months following that in the second half of 2022 than in the entire preceding 100+ years of United States history and jurisprudence. So this Brune decision has been absolutely critical to kicking unconstitutional and illegal gun laws back. And certainly, probably, the circuit that has been doing the best on that has been the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit has had between 65 to 80% of their judges appointed by Republican presidents. On the note of turnover, Another thing to keep in mind is that basically these courts tend to turn over the federal judiciary about close to 25% per presidential term. Sometimes it's closer to 20%. So in other words, if one party were to have back-to-back two-term presidents, they would all but take over a significant majority of the federal judiciary. This is the reason why voting for the presidency matters and why it can also be viewed by many people as a surrogate vote for the federal judiciary, as well as, of course, our Second Amendment future. Let's take a look at third place now. In third place, we actually have a tie. I'm going to go to the 11th Circuit first. This is the one based out of Atlanta. This has Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. Those three states. Your different federal trial courts will appeal up to the Atlanta-based 11th Circuit. We have between 50 to 65% of the judges in the 11th Circuit are appointed by Republican presidents. Tied for third place is also the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, based in Cincinnati, also with between 50 to 65% of their lifetime appointed judges from Republican presidents. We have Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and Tennessee. Always fun to see Michigan and Ohio, I'm sure, peacefully coexisting with one another. Nothing but peace and love between those states. So there you have the 6th Circuit. Fourth, this one's a little interesting. I'm going to defend this one. We've got the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. This is the one that I'm in. This is based out of Chicago. No, I do not live in Chicago. I live in Wisconsin. It's Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana. We likewise have 50 to 65% of judges coming from Republican presidents. However, we keep getting anti-Second Amendment decisions out of the 7th Circuit because some of those judges are brilliant, but they tend to be a little eccentric in their decision-making, the ones appointed by some Republicans, and as a result, they have not always gone the right way when it comes to Second Amendment. Now, keep in mind as well, when we're talking about these, the way that most of the time these cases come to be, and this is important to understand. Let's say you've got 12 judges in a circuit. Okay. In any given case, they're going to poll a random group of 3 typically. So let's say you have 6-6, right? 6 Republican appointed, 6 Democrat appointed. All right. Your random group of 3 could be 3 from either wing or 2 of one of the other. So even in a circuit that could tilt heavily one way or the other, you could still wind up with a panel of judges that leans one way that maybe goes away from the direction that their circuit ordinarily flows in. Keep that in mind. Oftentimes, when you get an important case or a big case where that happens, where maybe the whole circuit leans one direction, but the particular panel that they got leans the other, the person who loses that appeal, if it's discernibly along political perspective or judicial philosophy lines, what they'll do is they'll ask for a rehearing en banc, E-N-B-A-N-C, 2 words, en banc. And that's code for, we got screwed with the panel we got. We want this case reheard by all the judges. And then all the judges, there's basically a conference and they have to determine whether or not they're going to allow that. But keep in mind that mechanism is out there for en banc hearings. They don't ordinarily start that way, but they sometimes, on occasion, finish that way, and that's typically one of the circumstances that will get them there. In 5th place, we've got the 3rd Circuit Court of Appeals, which is pretty split. This is the one based out of Philadelphia. We're talking about Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and of course, the U.S. Virgin Islands. So Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. In 6th place, we've got a 5-way tie. 5-way tie. We are now into the circuits that all tilt towards Democrat-appointed judges. I'm going to start in the 2nd Circuit Court of Appeals. I'm going to go through these quickly. 2nd Circuit Court. These are all now circuits that are between 50 to 65% Democrat majority. So judges have been appointed by a Democrat president. 2nd Circuit, we're talking New York State. We're talking Vermont. We're talking Connecticut. 4th Circuit, based out of Richmond, Virginia. We've got Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and West Virginia. We have the ever-famous 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, which at this point is down to a 50 to 65% Democratic majority, based out of San Francisco. We've got California, Arizona, Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Washington State, Guam, and of course, who could forget, Northern Mariana. So we've got 2 territories and a bunch of states piled into the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals. We have been getting some pro-Second Amendment rulings, believe it or not, thanks to the fact that that court used to be tilted very much one direction. It's now starting to get back, meaning you can still pull those panels where even though it cuts the wrong way against the circuit, you can still have a chance of getting 2 pro-gun jurists on that circuit. And last but not least, in the same group tie, we've got the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. This is the one based out of Denver. We are still in the 50 to 65% democratically appointed majority. Here we're talking about Colorado, Kansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Utah, and Wyoming. Then also worth mentioning, we also have the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. This is 50 to 65% as well, Democratic majority. In last place, as measured under these metrics, we've got the First Circuit Court of Appeals. This is based out of Boston. We have Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Puerto Rico. We are at 80% plus Democrat appointees, 80% plus. There's a reason why you do not see many fine organizations like FPC, GOA, SAF, National Association for Gun Rights, and others not bringing lawsuits in the First Circuit if they can help it. Now you know why. And our winner, first place, I bet a lot of you thought it was me, the Fifth Circuit, but we have the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals based out of St. Louis. We have Missouri, Minnesota, I can say that as a Wisconsinite,
Minnesota, oh my,
Iowa, Arkansas, Nebraska, North Dakota, and South Dakota. 80% plus Republican appointed judges. 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, Missouri, Minnesota, Iowa, Arkansas, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, based out of St. Louis. So congratulations. If you are a resident of the 8th Circuit, I realize that some of you in some of these states, particularly those of you perhaps most notably in Minnesota, you're sitting there saying, doesn't feel like I'm in a pro-gun panel. I get that. These things take time. A lot of the lawsuits that are being litigated, there might be one particular issue that affects you in Minnesota or whatever state you're in, but it's being litigated on the other side of the country for various reasons. So law takes time to fix things. The legislature can move very fast to break things. I'm not saying that this is the way it ought to be. I'm simply saying this is the way that it is. So there you have it. So there's our ranking of all of our different federal circuit courts. Hopefully you got a little bit more information about why it's so important. Hopefully you don't forget to hit that like button. Comment down below. What is your order? What did I get wrong? I know I put the 8th Circuit first, despite the fact that we've got so many crushing victories coming out of the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals. So that might be a little controversial. I get it. But what do you think? Tell me in the comment field down below. Let's close with our ever popular quote of the day. Quality is not an act. It's a habit. Aristotle, all about making those habits and how those habits in turn make you. We appreciate you sticking around, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.